I'm Achyuta Adhvaryu. I'm the Chancellor's Endowed Professor of Economics at UC San Diego's GPS, and also the Director of the 21st Century India Center. So I did a series of randomized control trials in India to examine the impacts of pathways for worker voice on a host of worker and firm-related outcomes. So the first trial that I implemented in this space was using a very analog way of communicating voice, which was a simple satisfaction survey for workers. So what we did was, right around the time of an impending wage increase that usually happens in the time period around May and June in Karnataka, this large state in India, we decided to implement a simple satisfaction survey for workers in which we asked them in various ways how they felt about their job environment, their supervisor, their wages, and a host of other issues, and let them air out sort of grievances and concerns in a kind of more qualitative, free-flowing manner, and tested the impacts of simply asking those questions on their subsequent behavior. The critical juncture here was that this wage increase was supposed to be quite large, and it ended up being much smaller than workers were expecting. And what we found in the several months after the survey was administered is that there was a lot of turnover at the firm, as we expected because of the disappointing increase in wages, but that turnover was muted in the treatment group. So there was much less turnover as a result of the satisfaction survey, just as a result of simply asking what people were feeling about their jobs and their wages and their working conditions. So we thought that this was really interesting, but maybe not the most organic way to go about increasing voice or developing a channel for voice. So we decided in our second trial to partner with a provider that enabled a two-way anonymous form of communication through text messaging on cell phones that allowed interface with HR. When we looked at the outcomes there, we found that workers were less likely to turn over in the treatment group, and then that decrease in turnover was exactly the same as the decrease in turnover when we did the employee satisfaction survey. So interestingly, whether you directly ask workers or you give workers this sort of option of communicating their grievances, we find very similar impacts on turnover. Those impacts also translated into reductions in absenteeism. So, what we're calling these days quiet quitting, where you stop showing up to your job or stop working hard or putting in effort, that also decreased as a result of the intervention. In that trial, we also found zero impacts on productivity. So HR is doing a ton of extra work to field all of these comments, and they were actually doing this quite well for the first few months of the program that we evaluated. But after that, they started getting tired. They weren't being compensated extra for this. There's lots of extra work coming in. So some of the stuff then started falling off, and complaints and suggestions started going unaddressed. And that really generates a lack of kind of motivation to keep engaging with the employer. If I keep telling you something and you're not engaging, you're not responding in the right way, then I don't really have a voice. So in our third trial, we actually designed our own technology that was meant for use for low tech literacy populations. It used voice recognition software and voice-to-text software to make it very easy for people who don't have a lot of texting literacy, et cetera, to just call in and still have their things be translated and put into an HR software, remain anonymous, et cetera, and have that two-way anonymous communication feature remain. But in one of the treatment groups in this third trial, we also introduced incentives for HR to do a good job. When we did that, and we looked at the outcomes, we found that while we do find increases in staying with the firm, so decreases in turnover and decreases in absenteeism of similar magnitudes in this last trial to the previous two, we find productivity increases that are only in the group where HR was incentivized. Incidentally, also, we found that in that last group with the incentives for HR, earnings for workers also went up because of the productivity increases. So this is really, really interesting because not only do we get gains in voice, but also gains in earnings that go along with the productivity that that voice generates. So currently what we're trying to do with all of this body of work is, in addition to convincing people to take up this software, in large firm settings, we are also directly scaling the technology that we developed through an NGO that I helped found called Good Business Lab. And that technology is now active in, I think, about 60 factories across India, and it affects hundreds of thousands of workers every day.